Hello, everybody. Hello. Thanks for joining us tonight. Watching as people are jumping on the call. Thank you for being here with us for the phases of life, the human being between Earth and cosmos, with the Anthroposophical Society in America, Patti Smith and Chris Burke from the Center for Biography and Social Art. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And we're so excited you're joining us. And as you come on, as folks come on, if they could use the Q&A and just type in where you are joining us from. We'd love to hear where you are in the country. I'm up here in Northern California. Chris, where are you?
I'm in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania right now.
Woohoo! How about you, Patti?
I'm in Hope Valley, Rhode Island, that great little state.
Very nice. That is a great little state. Okay, well, thanks for joining us. And let's see if other people are, if you can type into the Q&A where you're calling from. That's great. Jamestown, Rhode Island? Okay. There we go. Anybody else want to share in the Q&A where you're calling in from? If you do, go ahead and type that in. I just wanted to tell everybody that if you didn't get a full introduction to Chris and Patti last time, I just want to say that I feel so lucky to be working with both of you. And Chris, you know, we've known each other for quite some time, and Patti, I feel like we've known each other for quite some time, but your warmth and depth of knowledge in this area of biography and understanding human life cycles has just been really incredible. So thanks for being here. Okay, we've got a couple more people typing in where they're calling from, and that's Cynthia, sorry, from San Francisco, and we've got Jacqueline from Tampa, Florida, or Palm Harbor. So thank you. And if you don't want us to use your name, I'm not sure, if you're using the Q&A, you might be able to see everything everybody's typing in. Maybe we have Tess on here, maybe she can let us know if everybody can just see names already. But we did want to give you an option if you don't want us to use your name, just to let us know and type that in there, and we'll do the best we can with that. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Patti and Chris to get started, and I know we'll have more people joining over time, but lots of people will also be watching the recording. So hello to all of you too.
Great, and we're going to leave time for questions at the end, and we want to actually start by explaining a question that we received at the end of last meeting. Somebody asked us about when a person is suffering from trauma in childhood, what do you do with these kind of difficult issues? And it was a great question, and we thank you very much for asking it. What I would like to do is take a couple minutes to explain that when you're doing phases work and you're looking at your life and other people's life, it is very sensitive and very meaningful work. And it's really important to create safe spaces. At the Center for Biography and Social Art, we borrowed from Parker Palmer the touchstones that they use in creating their circles of trust. And we have added them at the end of this webinar so that you can use them with friends and people that you work with, so that there's a sensitivity to the level and depth of what one can share and the kinds of confidentiality that are important to maintain. So just to share a couple of those touchstones with you, one of them is that all sharing is by invitation only. It is not share or die, and that's how it is on this call as well. Please feel free to share what you would like to share, but it's not necessary to share, and you don't have to share your deepest insights, but maybe a simple image of what you're thinking. And second of all, one of my favorite touchstones is that remember that silence is a friend in the circle, and it's going to be a friend in this meeting as well. We're going to give you a few exercises to do, and Chris is going to be our bell ringer, and we're actually going to have a minute for each one of them. It will seem like a flash to some of you, and it will seem like an eternity to some of you as well. So watch how that is for you, holding the silence as we move forward today. So again, thanks for that question. Chris will now give you a more clinical perception of that, since he's the psychologist on board.
Thanks. So I wanted to do two things here. The first thing is to just elaborate on something that we said last time, to just make sure that we're communicating clearly about it. And that has to do with this idea of a human life being a coherent story, a coherent narrative. And one way to hear that is to look at the negative experiences that have come upon someone and to say that, that person somehow deserved that negative experience. They deserved that pain, or they had it coming, or they invited it upon themselves in some way. And that's not really what we mean at all. A person doesn't have control over what comes to them from the outside. They're not free in that way. And it also doesn't, it's not meant to excuse or to exonerate the individuals who perpetrate those kinds of negative behaviors. Where an individual does have more control, though, or more freedom, is in how they react to and how they respond to those kinds of experiences and how they integrate them and make sense of them. And that's really what we do with biography work, is we try to return to experiences from the past and to look and see in what ways the person's story and what ways that person's life trajectory has been influenced by that kind of experience. And to maybe look beyond the obvious ways, right? So sometimes you have an experience and there's a very big and profound and glaring way that experience has transformed you. But there may also be subtler ways that don't get as much attention, or that may kind of fade away over time. And through biography work, we can really come to get back down to that level of those finer influences. And even in some cases, we can get to the point of finding elements of personal growth or elements of self-development that occur as a result of those very difficult or painful experiences. Again, that's not always the case, but sometimes you can see those. And actually, just to grab one example from everyday life in the past week or so, I was really touched by, we had this very tragic school shooting at the STEM school in Colorado, and there was a young man named Kendrick Castillo who was killed in that shooting. And he was killed when he ran after the attackers and tried to protect other people from being harmed, and he was killed in that process. And I saw an interview with his father on the news, and was just very touched by his very emotional reaction to the experience, but saying, there's a part of him that wishes that his son would have made a different decision, that he would have hid, he would have run, he would have protected himself in some way. But he said, that's just that's who he was. That's how we raised him. We raised him to stand up for what he believed in, to, when something was threatening him, that he would not shirk away from it, that he would go after it, and that he's a hero, and that he's an extraordinary person. And just to see that level of the ability to see that silver lining in that very difficult experience is something that you can sometimes see when you work through these biographical experiences. It's also one thing that I find sometimes too, when, especially in the cases where there's someone who is killed, or someone who is no longer the same, can't be the same, can't live a normal life after undergoing some sort of difficult experience. I look at that as part of my biography too, that incident has made its way into my consciousness. And I have to ask myself the question, how is my biography influenced by learning about that? How am I transformed by coming across that, by that entering my consciousness? And in that way, when I can work with an experience in that way, I can think that, maybe that suffering wasn't in vain. And then, just as Patti said, to talk about a clinical dimension a little bit, that, there really is, when you're working with traumatic experiences, there's an important role for mental health professionals. That, if you're dealing with a traumatic experience that interferes with your ability to function on a daily basis, that diminishes your quality of life significantly, that distracts you from the things and the tasks that you need to be working on, it's time to seek professional help. And also that there are people who are trained in both traditional mental health counseling and biography work. And so if you can find someone like that, that might be a particularly powerful combination for working through some of these experiences. And we have some of those individuals listed up on our center's website. Okay, so with that little preamble, we want to step you into a little opening exercise. As we did last time, we like to start with a little introduction that gives you an opportunity to just sort of check in. And it gives us an opportunity to see how everyone's arriving. What's the mood of the crowd? What's the state that everybody's stepping into this space with? And it also gives you an opportunity to check in with yourself and to ask yourself, what is it that I'm carrying with me into this work? What is it that I'm holding on to from earlier experiences? And maybe give you the opportunity to try to set those aside if that's something that's necessary. So our activity for this exercise is to think about your day. Think about today. Think about what you've experienced today and summarize that day in 5 words. If you could use just 5 words to summarize what happened to you today or your experience of the day, what would those 5 words be? They could be 5 individual descriptors. It could be a short little phrase. However you interpret that is great for us. And I'm going to start the timer in just a second. You'll have a minute to work on that. Type in your responses in the Q&A box as you come up with them. And if you feel free to share them if you like, or keep them to yourself. And after the chime sounds, then Laura will share a couple of the responses. So here we go. So there's the chime. If anybody would like to share, please feel free to do so in the Q&A box.
Thank you. These exercises are so nourishing. Yeah, so you can use the Q&A to type it in. If you can't find the Q&A, but you can see the chat, you can use that too. That's just fine.
So mine, I'll go first, okay?
Great.
Mine is lovely working with Chris preparing.
Nice. Okay, here's another one. New ideas, larger connections, learning. Oh, here's another one. Hope meets resolve, planting seeds. And another. Rain moving, point periphery, slow down. Thank you.
So very briefly, I'd just like to recap last session. We focused on the first 21 years of life, childhood, and we are pretty clear about how we delineate those 7-year phases from early childhood to adolescence to young adulthood. And they're fairly widely known, and you can identify the outer appearances of the changes that mark these various phases. We know with early childhood, the fontanelle closes, the teeth fall out. In adolescence, you can see puberty happening for children, and by 21, most people have reached their full physical growth. Now, as we begin to move into this next phase, the outer appearances are not as visible, and the delineation of the 7-year phases is not as clear. It's our experiences, our inner experiences, that help us to understand and mark the phases of the life of the soul. And again, I want to encourage you to listen to the first webinar to get a deeper picture of that first phase.
Great, thanks, Patty. And I'm going to sort of lead us into the theme for today, but I'm going to stay on this slide for just a moment and point you back to this graphic that appears at the top of the screen here that comes from Sidney Schaefer's book, Why on Earth? And in this picture, we see these three lines. We see the line of spirit incarnating. We see the line of the body at the bottom that's developing. And we see this middle line of the soul that's unfolding over time. And so we want to take a step back right now and consider this threefold nature of the human being in a little bit more detail, right? So these three, the body, soul, and spirit, represent these three concurrent streams of development. And we can really think of the human being as the meeting of these three streams, right? We have this, the stream of heredity in the physical body. We have the stream of the individuality in the spirit. And we have this stream of the spirit that sort of meets to bind them together, to hold them together in a state of dynamic balance. And so this weaving back and forth between body and spirit is really the work of the soul. And so these three streams play a prominent role in Rudolf Steiner's picture of the human being, and they can be related to threefold aspects of other areas of life. And so, for instance, in the book Theosophy, Rudolf Steiner gives this little quote where he says that human beings are rooted in the physical world through their bodies, and through their spiritual aspects, they come to flower in the spiritual world. The stalk, however, that takes root in the one and flowers in the other is the soul itself. So we get this plant-like picture of body, soul, and spirit, where the body represents the roots. We have the flower and the seeds that represent the spiritual aspect, and then we have this stalk that moves back and forth between them, right? So we could say that childhood, in a certain sense, is about establishing strong roots, and that the middle period of life is about sort of building up a sturdy stalk, and that older age is about, you know, coming to flower and passing on seeds for the future. In Dennis Klocek's book, The Biodynamic Book of Moons, he refers to the threefold plant process as absorption, repetition, and sublimation, right? So you have the root system that's absorbing, you have the stalk in between, that's part of this repetition process, and then you have the sublimation process, that flowering process. And we can relate this to other things as well. If we think about the three acts of a drama, right? The idea that the first act is kind of the setup. It sets the stage for the action of the story. The middle phase is the confrontation or the rising action, or, you know, that's where a lot of the activity is happening. And then in the third act is kind of the climax and the resolution. And so each of these gives us a different picture of the threefold unfolding of the human being. And we said last time that the first 21 years is primarily associated with the development of the body. And so the second 21-year period represents the development of the soul. So we wanted to take a minute now just to say a little bit more about what do we mean by the soul and what is it that's happening here in this time. Steiner says that around age 21, the ego, or the higher self, is born within the individual. And this ego is our individuality, it's our spiritual core, and it allows us to function as independent beings in the world. It allows us to function independently from others. And we can see how this agency gets reflected in outer life. We know that there are certain ages that are attached to being considered an adult, right? And for different kinds of activities, that threshold looks a little bit different, but many of them fall between age 18 and 21. And so there's this recognition that you have to reach a certain stage of maturity before you're able to fully make decisions for yourself and before you're fully able to accept responsibility for your actions. So the ego lives within the soul. That's where the ego lives within the individual. And so this second 21-year period being characterized by the development of the soul, the ego is working through the layers of the soul, individualizing the layers of the soul. Right? It's not to say that they weren't there before, but now we have this individualizing process that's taking place. And so the soul is what we think of as the inner world of the individual. It's the place where outer stimuli become inner experiences. And Steiner points out that even simple sensations are part of our inner world, right? That when I have an experience and you have an experience, we can never be sure that our experiences are congruent with each other, right? That I can see something and I can know that it's red, and you can see the same thing and know that it's red, but I can never know that my red looks the same as your red, right? So these are fundamentally soul experiences. And the Steiner walks through 3 different levels of soul experience. He says that, first of all, we can simply experience sensations, right? So we can have this inner experience of an outer stimulus. And that's what he refers to as the sentient soul. And then we have this deeper level where we can not only experience, but we can actually step out of our experience a little bit, and we can think about our experience. We can think about our sensations. We can reflect on those experiences. And so that's a deeper level that sort of allows us to step out of the stream of time a little bit, and allows us to hold on to our experiences in a way that is transformative. And then finally, the 3rd level of the soul is what he calls the consciousness soul. And this is going beyond simply, characterizing our experiences in terms of pleasure and displeasure, but really seeking for the eternally true and the eternally good in our experience, and that the true and the good live at this deeper level of our soul that he calls the consciousness soul. And as Patti mentioned last time, humanity as a whole, this is kind of where we are right now. This is our task right now, is to develop this consciousness soul, develop this capacity to seek out the true and the good, and to learn to experience that, to work to that through our experiences. So I just want to give one more quote from Steiner before I transition on to the next topic. But this comes from a lecture he gave in 1909. He says that the ego plays upon the soul's 3 members as a person plays upon the strings of an instrument, and the harmony or disharmony which the ego calls forth by playing on the 3 soul members is the basis of human character. The ego is indeed something of an inner musician who, with a powerful stroke, calls one or other soul member into activity, and the effects of their combined influence, resounding from within a human being as harmony or disharmony, make up the real foundation of the person's character. So, referring to the ego as a musician here reminds us that when we're talking about these inner experiences, we're really talking about a level of experience that is more deeply rooted, a little bit more secretive, but also more fluid and dynamic than the kinds of outer changes that we were talking about last time. And so what that means to us as biography workers is that the way that we do this biography work, the exercises that we bring to work into past experiences in an artistic way, that's really the way to gain access to these kinds of experiences, that's how we can work back into those deeper experiences. So it really highlights the importance of the biography and social art way of working. Okay, so just to orient then to where we are this time, we're talking about this middle phase of life between 21 and 42. I'll say in a minute that these are the sun years, and we'll talk about how they're connected to the sun. But this is, just referring back to what I just said. These are the soul years. This is the stock of life, right? This is the repetition phase of life, and this is also in the 3-act play. This is the confrontation or the rising action. And unlike last time where we treated each of the 3 7-year phases individually, we're going to spend the bulk of the time this time focusing on this whole 21-year period in a broad sweep, where we're going to spend more time doing that than we did last time. Because as we can see in the image, this period kind of forms its own self-contained wholeness, right? That there's a journey that happens here that is kind of self-contained. And here's actually a good place to note that at some point in the work that we're doing, it might happen today and it might happen next time, we're going to reach a point where you haven't reached yet in your development, right? So maybe you're not quite 42 yet, or some point we'll reach that stage. And so if we're doing an exercise that asks you to refer to a particular point of your life and you haven't experienced that point of your life yet, feel free to work on an earlier period of your life that seems appropriate for you. Look for an experience that you have had that fits the description. And our only encouragement is to try not to pick something that's too recent, because sometimes you need a little bit of distance from an experience before it can really start to reveal itself to you. So this period is marked by stepping out into and engaging with the world, right? So we said that the ego is born around age 21, and you step out into the world, and now the real action begins. So there can be tension or confrontation between ideals and reality. Last time we talked about the the ideals of the adolescent years that sort of propel you into these sun years. And so you have this conflict between ideals and reality. And you can settle into rhythms. There are daily rhythms, weekly rhythms, yearly rhythms that you step into. You engage with the world and you step back, and you engage and you step back. And all of these rhythms are oriented towards growth. You're working towards building something up. But you can also have the experience of it feels repetitive. It feels depleting. It feels like you're just spinning your wheels, like you're not going anywhere. Then I'll just refer you back to that image on the previous slide of the little oak sapling there, right? That the strength of the oak comes from the growth comes from the slow pulsing of vital forces through the oak over many, many years. And its strength really comes from the slowness of its growth, right? If you look at trees that grow faster, they're often not very strong, right? So the strength comes from the slow growth. And so a key then is really sustaining the effort and engagement with the world, and to develop some patience and some trust for what is being developed, right? That recognizing that again, a lot of the activity is happening inwardly here, and that you have to trust that something is really happening inwardly, even if the outward signs don't really look like you think they ought to look. And I just have one little quote here from Paulo Coelho in The Alchemist. He says that when each day is the same as the next, it's because people fail to recognize the good things that happen in their lives every day that the sun rises. They fail to recognize the good things that happen every day that the sun rises. And so, as I said, this whole period, this 21-year period, is the sun years. And so when we think about the sun, we think about a couple of qualities. We think about polarity and finding balance between the poles, right? So we experience warmth when we think of the sun, but we also recognize that if the sun were just a shade closer or just a shade farther away, that the earth would be totally uninhabitable, right? That there's this very delicate balance of a very powerful force. We could also say similarly that the sun brings us illumination, right? It lights the world, it lights up our day, but it can also be blinding, right? And so part of the sun connection here in these years is to discover your power and to learn to channel and harness it appropriately. And then, of course, whenever there's sun, there's also shadow. And the soul moves back and forth during this time between light and darkness, light and darkness. And so in each of the individual phases, what we'll try to do is to highlight both the sunny side of the phase, but also some of the darker sides, some of the darker pieces. Recognizing that especially in adult life, experiences are greatly varied. And nobody really fits the prototype in an outward way. But what we try to do in the biography work is to try to find some levels of inner congruence, to try to find that maybe there's an inner congruence of yearning or a particular orientation that is shared among people during this time. And that might look very different from the outside, but we might be able to discover those kinds of inner qualities. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Patti.
Okay, I love this particular guy. I hope I meet him someday on the streets of New York City. Yes, the journey begins at 21, and he is stepping out into the world, as many people do at this time, for the first time on their own. It's a time of great adventure. It's a time of looking for romantic love, for finding close friends, the people with whom you resonate, finding my peeps, as they say. And it's also a time for trying to find a profession, a kind of work that we feel we'll be competent in and comfortable in. Inner experiences of conflict are also strong at this time. We struggle, as Chris was saying, with freedom and independence, and at the same time with fear and doubt. Who do I want to be? Who do I want to be with? How do I want to be in the world? Are all the questions that are pulsing back and forth inside a person at this time. If we're lucky, we begin to hear an inner voice. It's just a whisper at this point, but it speaks to us from within and begins to give us a sense of our own karma and destiny. If we don't cultivate this relationship with that voice, it's as though we'll find ourselves finding our answers in the outer sense world rather than being able to look inside ourselves to find what our choices should be. Overall, we're also not anxious to get advice from others at this time because we have a strong sense of ourselves as knowing it all and being able to handle our own life. If we look back into our own lives at this time, we're likely to recall these struggles, being uncertain, and at the same time, there's a great deal of permanence. Many of us find our life partner, have our children, find ourselves in a profession where we put a lot of our energy and goodwill. And at the same time, some of us are uncomfortable because we can't find our place. So we're moving between finding the things that are going to help us make that step and continue stepping into our life and struggling with how we can't seem to find that. And we can go back to early childhood and think about how we come onto the earth with a set of gifts. We bring talents with us. And it becomes pretty clear as we grow and begin school that we also bring a set of challenges. So here we are stepping out into the world, and the gifts we have can't start weighing us down because stepping forward, we also begin to experience those challenges that we have to begin to deal with. So now let's do an exercise that's going to allow us to take a little deep dive, take a step back into the time we were 21 to 28. And what I'd like you to do is to think about the first place you lived that you felt was your own place. Did you choose it yourself? Did you live alone? Did you live with other people? Do you still know the people that you lived with at that time? How did you feel living there? So on the screen, you'll see several images. And you can use these images to sort of render up your own image of that place. How would you describe it? Where was it? Was it exciting? What state were you in? What country were you in? So Chris is going to start the chime, and you can be digging in and coming up with the images of this first place of your own. I hope some of you would be willing to share.
Yeah, so if you're willing to share, that'd be great. And you can type that in the Q&A or the chat if you can't find the Q&A. I could picture this perfectly. Yes. See if anybody shares. So I could picture my apartment, my senior year of college, and I was all by myself, and I was so excited. Like it was mine, you know, and it had some really horrible wood paneling that I painted in white. And I just remember like cooking a meal for myself and like watching some meditation videos or something like it. That was all sort of, it was just like a little sanctuary kind of space. I did feel lonely sometimes though too, and I just had my heart terribly broken. So there was that to it too. So I was alone. I was happy to be alone, but I was also sort of sad. I don't know, maybe if anybody else wants to share, that'd be great. Okay, here comes someone. Hang on a second. Yeah, first room by myself while at college, another person. I loved it. In the UK. Nice. Anyone else want to share? Pretty quiet here. People reflecting. Thanks. Oh,
yeah, so I invite you. Okay, good.
I did get one more. Sorry about that. Oh, look at this. Overseas. Bern, Switzerland. I don't know how to say that next word. Landelstra. Tiny kitchen with a wood stove, no fridge. Really felt like it was home after I painted the bathroom golden and red and the hall dark chocolate brown with white trim. So something about the painting of it. Yes. Thank you for sharing.
Great.
Oh, here's another one. An apartment in San Francisco with a large double lot that was covered with brambles and an old wood floor that was covered with bad carpeting. I removed the brambles and made a large vegetable garden and pulled up the rug and revealed and sanded the wood floors.
Nice.
Right. Thank you. You can really feel a lot of activity and a lot of working hard to make something one's own at that particular time. Thanks for sharing. And I invite you to dig a little more deeply into that on your own.
Great. So, so the 20s are starting to come to a close. And during that time, we transition out of this early part of our adult life when we are stepping out onto our own and really kind of exploring and experimenting with the world. And towards the end of the 20s, we start to maybe feel this urge to get committed. And Patti already mentioned that, towards the end of that, that first 21 to 28 period, people are starting to settle down. They're starting to start a family. They're starting to dive into, not just a job, but a career. And so this urge to be committed, to have a commitment, to stick with something for a while can be a strong feeling during this period from 28 to 35. So finding and sticking with a partner, finding and sticking with a career, starting a family, and so on. So this is the period of intellectual soul development. So this is a time of we can think of it as a time of meaning making or trying to find meaning. So you might have a recognition during this time that the opinions that you had or the beliefs that you have had, maybe you got them from other people. Maybe they're just, something that you borrowed from people that you know or groups that you belong to. And you might start to feel at this time like you really need to have your own opinions about things. You really need to start to form your own ideas about things. And this is what starts to happen as the ego works its way into the intellectual soul. Outwardly during this time, this is the period of really, it's the middle phase of the middle phase. So you're really working with what you have been building up, right? So with what you brought with you through childhood and what you've been working with during the previous 7-year phase, now you're really just, you're diligently working at it. Again, commitment is a strong feeling. Stability is something that people are often looking for during this time. A sense of, knowing what, predictability, knowing what to expect. There's this routine or rhythm that happens during this time, and it can be experienced in a pleasant way, right? It can feel good to know what to expect, to know what you need to do on a daily basis. Life is moving at a rapid pace, but at this time, people are often pretty good at keeping up with that pace of life. The shadow side of this phase comes from not finding the kinds of stability and commitment that you might be looking for, right? So that, career that you were looking for, maybe it didn't go like you planned it. Maybe progress toward that career is slower than you expected. Maybe you haven't found that partner that you're looking for yet. Or maybe even at this time, you might be experiencing separation and divorce as life gets complicated and paths start to diverge. And of course, many young couples experience difficulty in starting the family that they're looking to start. So in all of these experiences, there's something that runs against that desire to feel committed, to feel stable, to feel settled. And at this time, there's the term, the biological clock. There's also a similar term called the social clock, right? The kind of social expectations of life. And so during this time, you have this, the standards are kind of salient in your mind. And if you're not meeting those standards that you believe society has for you, you can start to feel that very strongly. Also, many individuals experience a sort of crisis around age 28 to 30. What you find is that the energy and enthusiasm that you carry with you through your 20s starts to kind of fade and dwindle a little bit. Things don't seem to come as easily as they had before. Everything seems like more of an effort. And in a certain sense, that's because you're no longer carried along by the outside world. This is the point where you really are on your own to carve your own path, to chart your own way forward. And so a lot of people can experience a crisis during this time where things just seem like they're not working the way they used to, and so that can be a difficult experience during this time. And actually, I'll just share one quick example. Steiner gives an example of Nietzsche having a sort of crisis during this time, and it's more of a crisis related to ideals and meaning, because he was building up these ideals for himself that he thought were very innovative, very unique, very forward-thinking, and he had this realization around that time that actually a lot of his contemporaries had similar kinds of ideals, and that if he shared ideals with other people of his time, he must not be so revolutionary. And so this really sent him spiraling for a while, but ultimately he was able to step out of that and to bring some really important and innovative ideas into the world. So, it's the time of crisis that propels you into something else. So with that, I want to lead into another exercise that will kind of bring us back into that period around age 30. And in this exercise, what we would like you to do is, again, to go back around age 30 and to look for a person who entered your life around that time, who had a significant impact on the direction that you were going, right? So someone enters your life, and as a result of that person entering your life, there's a change in direction of some kind. And it could be a big change in direction, or it could be a more minor change in direction, but try to find something like that in your experience. Try to find some relationship like that. And again, it could be an ongoing relationship, or it could be a fleeting relationship that still has a profound impact on you. And as we invite the silence into the circle, as we invite silence into the space, try to listen for less obvious persons, right? So maybe you meet your life partner around that time, and that might be an obvious person to talk about or to think about. But maybe there's also other people who come to mind a little bit more slowly that you might want to work with. So I'll start the timer, and again, you'll have a minute to reflect, and then Laura will share some responses.
Okay, yeah, feel free to share. You said around 30, right? It could be just around that time.
Around that time. Could be a little sooner, could be a little later.
And if anybody has something they'd like to share, they can.
This might be a nice place to say, again, that, you know, when we do these kinds of exercises in a workshop, we would never give just 1 minute to think about something. We would always give more time for reflection. So you know, it may be worth revisiting these questions when you have a little bit more space to enter back into those times, and maybe something new will come out for you.
Yeah, I can certainly think of before and after 30, and 30 seems like, oh, I'm trying to think. I can remember what I did for my birthday that year. But
anybody unexpected come to the party?
Okay, here we go. Someone said their first boss at an English language school in Bern, Switzerland. This person introduced them to Anthroposophy, and they started their first study group around this time on philosophy of spiritual activity, definitely setting a new direction in her life. Thank you. That's great. I'm glad. It's great someone could think of something that could be doing.
Well, I think, oh, looks like there's one more.
Okay, great. There we go. Yeah, a friend around age 28 who made it possible, and this is Tess, who said it was possible for her to move from Rhode Island to New York, which was a really important transition. So somebody that made it possible to move from state to state.
Great. All right, well, we can continue moving along. I'll hand it back over to Patti.
Great. So I'm going to sort of lead us into this 35 to 42. And this is a very important time also. I mean, this whole middle phase, keep thinking of that stock. And now we're getting to the point where, you know, the nutrients, the stock is growing stronger. And the nutrients are just about to need to get all the way up so the flower can blossom. So it takes a lot of activity, and it takes a lot of consciousness. And that's what, and also by the time you're 42, you've probably reached the halfway point in your life. So imagine that this is a very big consideration that happens at this time frame. We can no longer rely on the forces that we carried from the spiritual world into life. This is the end of the road for that. And we are who we become, and what we are creating of our lives is completely dependent on us. It's a really critical thing to think about that. How did I allow myself not only to step into the world, but how did I allow myself to really step into my destiny, to become who I came here to be? It's really interesting that in the United States, you can't be president until you're 35 years old, because it is said that that's a time when we are able to give ourselves internal counsel, internal informed counsel. Imagine that. So even there are, somehow out there are these understandings that we are ripe for certain experiences at certain ages. This can be a time, moving a little bit more deliberately into what Chris was already saying. It's a time when we find ourselves either at the top of our game, feeling large and in charge, shining brightly in our careers, or, you know, the sun isn't so bright and shiny, and we feel a little bit lost, and we're not sure where we're headed. It could be a time of despair, living in this shadow. And when I think back to my life then, and in these times that we live in, people are working Some people are going back to school or continuing school. People have 1 or 2 or 3 children. They have to do everything for each one of those children, for their spouse, for themselves. We live in a time when this is an extremely challenging time to find an anchor and to keep centered and to make time to hear that inner voice. And something happens here, something very important that I'm reminded of. I'm reminded of Robert Frost's very famous poem, The Road Not Taken. And I'm just going to share with you one of the stanzas of that poem. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere, ages and ages hence, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. This is a good time to look back on, sometime between 42 and 45, and ask yourself, what road did I take at this time in my life? Was I satisfied with the road I was on? Did I decide that it was the road that I should continue on? Or did I realize I needed to make a change? I needed to change my course, change my direction, because something new and different was calling on me. And what I'd like you to do in this case is to sort of try and locate yourself in that time frame, somewhere around 40, and ask yourself, did I change course, or can I remember being really satisfied with the course I was on? And what kind of a path was that in your wood? Was it foggy? Was it rocky? Was it bright? Was it sandy? What was that new path like? Was it easy? Did you choose something that was going to be difficult? Why don't we at least try and zero in on that much for right now, and then I'll invite you to a deeper level after we locate that change. Could we have the gong, Chris? So take a minute and try and think about this path taking. So if anyone's willing to share, we'll take a moment or two to hear those.
You said something about it being foggy or bright. I was thinking like I was the fog machine, but the light was so bright. I just had to stop making the fog. If anybody would like to share, you can type that in. I'm just noticing we don't have that much time left.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So here's one. For a while, it was hard to see any path at all, much less a choice. Then I made big changes, returned to the United States, became a Waldorf high school teacher. This was hard, but ultimately wonderfully rewarding. Big changes. Mm-hmm. Oh, I started therapy. That's another share.
So thank you. And I'd like to add a couple of other dimensions of this particular time frame in your life and expand on this very question for you to consider outside of the webinar. One of the things that's important as you come up the ladder of age, there's more you can look back on. So I think you could be standing at this crossways of being at the middle of your life, and you can look back over your life. You can look at experiences you had, people you met that were influential and helped you to get to where you were then. And so I would invite you to think back, not only to even further back than 21, but particularly, was there a connection between that path change and anything about yourself as you took that first step out into the world? Was there any connection to the people or person who influenced you along the way? I call them the sort of the stepping stones who helped me on my path to find myself. And is there, can you find connections to that point when you were 42 years old at this place of great change and the finishing of the development of the soul? And as we will see as we move into the next webinar, we'll be looking at a phase where the spiritual self develops. So thank you, and I hope that you enjoy going on that journey with yourself.
Great. So I was going to do a little summary and wrap up here, but we only have a couple of minutes left. So I would say if you've got questions that you would like us to answer in the last couple of minutes, please do submit those questions to the Q&A, and maybe we can field at least one of those in the time that we have left.
Yep, so we do have a few minutes, so it'd be great to hear if there are any questions. So much in this period of time. Thank you for the exercises. And I definitely have some people I want to share this with if they haven't registered already, that are sort of in that middle phase.
And anybody who thinks of a question after we close in a couple of minutes, is there a way they can send you that question?
Oh, sure. Just email me. Everyone has my email because they registered, but it's laura@anthroposophy.org, and you can email me your questions. I don't see any questions coming in. I did have one question you said from at 21, around that time, in that 21 to 28, if you aren't having this sort of awakening or remembering, I might be getting this all wrong, that you might reach out to the sense world. I feel like you said something like that. Well, to find, I'm just thinking of substances, for example, as something that might take hold during that 18 to, that 18 and then through, at least through college or that young adult time that I think a lot of people experience.
I think that's a very good point. The idea is that as we begin to hear our own inner voice, if we're lucky enough to have people around us who encourage us that's a real thing, then we continue to take it seriously and to listen harder for it. But if we don't have any encouragement that is a real voice, and if we only know that everything we're hearing from TV and video games and chats, and if that appears to be the only reality, it will be harder and harder as we create that stem to be able to become more introspective and listen to our true self and not be influenced by the world around us, rather than being able to get to the point where we can develop deliberateness in our consciousness, so that and discernment, because that discernment is what we want to make sure we have, at least by the time we're now moving into the phase we're going to talk about next week. We want discernment all along, but it's harder and harder to have that in these times. Thank you for elaborating on that. And I think that's really important for those of us that work with young people, to help them hear that voice and see it as something that's real for them. Okay, well, thank you both. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions and for sharing and for these beautiful slides. Chris and Patti, thank you so much, and for walking us through these great, as I said, nourishing exercises. It's been so nice to be with you, and we'll be with you again in 2 weeks for the next cycle. Yeah, next phase. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. We look forward to it. Okay. Goodbye. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye.